Throughout the day, we've been tempted by investments that we can make, opportunities to exploit, and risks to manage. The elephant in the room, as always, is how we fund these investments. Which brings us to this next session. For the first time in Australia, we will be hearing from three of the world's leading practitioners of the art and science of strategic procurement. Together, they have managed to position procurement as a critical asset for every organisation and leveraged it to accelerate transformation, unlock innovation, improve efficiency, and most importantly, to do good. So how did they do it? Allow me to introduce you to our first guest. Detlef Schultz is co-founder of Akira Labs, a German SaaS provider of an AI-enabled enterprise-wide collaboration platform for strategic procurement. He's chairman of the Vodafone Procurement Company in Luxembourg and holds board seats with the Vodafone Roaming Services in Luxembourg and Elleringfors in Denmark. Detlef is a senior advisor for the CEO of Makavert Pharmaceuticals in Colorado, USA. He joined Vodafone in 2003 to lead the global supply chain team and was responsible for the strategic and operational leadership of Vodafone supply chain management across the globe in areas of network infrastructure, IT, and services. From 2008, Detlef led the Luxembourg-based Vodafone Procurement Company, which provides a single point of purchase for the entire group. He stepped down from his role as CEO in 2016 after 13 years of service. Prior to Vodafone, Detlef spent more than 6 years in Santa Clara, California, with the world's largest semiconductor equipment manufacturer, Applied Materials. He was a member of the board of management for Babcock BSH in Germany, where he led supply chain management and financial control, and was also at Siemens for 10 years. He started his supply chain career with Siemens in 1985 in the area of materials management. Detlef was born and raised in Germany, has lived in Korea, Singapore, and the United States. He graduated from the University of Cologne with a master's degree in business. Welcome, Detlef.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today about enabling the future of procurement and unlocking additional value through procurement. And in order to do so, I would like to walk you briefly through the maturity curve of procurement. If I could have the next slide, please. The procurement development over the years basically started as a mere support function. In this role, procurement was responsible for placing purchase orders and delivering on the demand of stakeholders in the business. You see two axes on this slide, the procurement maturity and the value creation. And you also see that on the support function, the measurement of procurement success was basically efficiency. So how quickly did you place my purchase order? When did I get my material, etc.? The next phase of procurement development is that procurement becomes a kind of business partner. Procurement here applies the so-called category management. We educate people to become specialists in certain categories. We're talking with stakeholders. And in Vodafone, we applied a world-class methodology across 20 modules. And I think I can say that Vodafone was in the position to deliver serious savings to the company. However, in order to unlock the true value of procurement, we have to apply exponential thinking, and we have to think beyond category. We have to take advantage of procurement's role as spider in the web. In our ecosystem between the demand and the supply side, and procurement has to take advantage of data, has to take advantage of artificial intelligence, and with that has a much higher impact on the success of the company. But in order to really be on top of everything and become the primary provider of business insight and business foresight to our companies, procurement must be the value chain orchestrator. Now, that is easier said than done. And in so far, we applied some research and checked whether there are tools out there helping procurement to move up the maturity curve. The next slide, please. Yeah, by researching the market, it was obvious that there are a lot of tools out there, but most of those tools were for the areas of tactical and operational procurement. Exactly those areas I talked about earlier, which apply certain value in terms of efficiency and in terms of savings, but not the big value I was talking about. The big value I was talking about gets delivered through strategic thinking in procurement, and there we didn't find any tools. You have to imagine that in Vodafone, we placed roughly 820,000 purchase orders every year, and the entire area of the operational sourcing was to a high degree automated, so that this is going with the high level of compliance and the high level of repeatability with a very high level of efficiency, but the true value lies in strategic deliverables. And in order to unlock those strategic deliverables, procurement has to establish connectivity with all the nodes in the ecosystem internally and ecosystem externally. We have to create some digital glue. We have to connect the workflows, because procurement is probably the most fragmented department in our companies, because it has to deal with so many stakeholders. The next, please. So in order to move beyond category and beyond the demand side and beyond the supply side, procurement becomes a business partner to the stakeholders. But in order to do so and become a business stakeholder, procurement has to think differently. Procurement has to think beyond category. And just to give you a short example, we all know about the changing ecosystems in terms of platform business. If you're a machining supplier, you don't sell machines anymore. You're selling uptime to your customers. You're selling to a certain degree profitability, and therefore procurement must be able to think beyond category in platform thinking. They think beyond categories in terms of across and thinking in projects. They create the strategic intention, and Mark will talk about this later, certainly have to apply thinking with purpose. Beyond a supplier means that suppliers are meanwhile more than just a supplier. Suppliers are partners, they can be competitors, they can be joint innovation partners. So we have multilateral relationships where we can apply a broader set of levers to create purpose-driven relationships. All of this applies to procurement, which in my opinion, either in the web and in so far has a unique opportunity to deliver all those deliverables. The next, please. Akiro Labs is filling this gap by providing an AI-enabled collaboration platform, connecting all the ecosystem and fostering the collaboration between procurement and all the stakeholders in the company. We do this by institutionalizing early and continuous cross-functional involvement. So procurement is with the stakeholders at the beginning of the processes, and therefore we're turning poorly specified demand into a holistic demand overview. All the data we create and get created through the Internet of Things, through the connected nodes, through all the smart factories will be taken into the equation, and we have to apply auto sense making to figure out what's really important to create the right strategies. Akiro Labs helps here to automate the strategy creation and turning static category management into dynamic beyond category management. So in other words, we're basically shifting the focus from efficiency and savings to sustainable business value. The next, please. So in summary, by being, I call it the ranger in the ecosystem, or by being the orchestrator of the value chain, procurement is boosting value way beyond savings and efficiency, and procurement contributes to the business success, to our planet and society. And the average factor of value creation is 4.4 over savings and efficiency, only because now the total value of ownership is taking into the equation. We're focusing on total demand. Working capital, for instance, is one of the attributes we're working on. Innovation is something Warwick talks about. How do we tap into the largest innovation pool we have, our suppliers? How do we differentiate, support shorter time to market? And last but not least, enable top-line growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Detlef. There's a lot for us to talk about later. I'm quite looking forward to spending some time considering the competition versus collaboration conundrum, because it's an area that has traditionally vexed many organisations. Our next guest is Mark Perera. Mark is the founder and CEO of Visible, a Gartner Cool Vendor to 2020, and the founder of Procurement Leaders. He's on a mission to help companies collaborate with their supplier ecosystem to drive sustainable business growth. Visible is a technology company that enables enterprise organizations and their suppliers to manage all aspects of their relationship more effectively to deliver mutual value. It makes every aspect of the relationship lifecycle transparent, so companies can align on their governance, their strategy, and develop great ideas together. Mark is passionate about procurement's ability to drive positive change, and this is reflected in his book, Procurement with Purpose. Mark holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Southampton. Welcome, Mark.
It's a lovely intro, and sorry I can't be there in person, but it's great to join you here remotely on the panel today. So yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit around what we're doing and where we're seeing procurement going in kind of the more advanced organizations, but the industry as a whole. You mentioned, or Detlef mentioned about sustainable business growth, and that's really the future of where we see the organizations going. If we look at procurement's role as a central part of the organization, I think in the past it's been a little bit more around the transactional side, looking at the savings and the efficiencies that can come through in terms of how the business buys. But where we're really seeing organizations now is really getting into the business strategy. So looking at the growth, the sustainability, but also the resilience side. And this is where the companies really need the help as they scale and take on the new challenges that come to them, as well as the disruptions that are coming through as well. How are they achieving sustainable business growth? Through supplier collaboration and innovation. So this is the new capability that organizations have been building. Vodafone, with Detlef, is one of our first customers at Visible. So they really leaned into the space of how they could tap into the innovation from their suppliers and accelerate the move to a new business model at Vodafone. But we're seeing this across multiple industries. We work with FMCG, telco tech, energy companies, pharma. They all see suppliers in terms of a key part of being the innovators of their companies, but also helping them with the sustainability and the performance side as well. Not too surprising, Gartner, obviously the analyst in this space, sees with supplier collaboration as a #1 priority for both procurement and supply chain. And these stats are coming from the leaders of both those functions. I'm really seeing companies now lean into this, both with the resourcing they're doing with their people, but also the technology and how they position themselves with their suppliers. If you think from moving from that transactional side to real collaboration, this is a different mindset, a different way of communicating, and also about how you build trust with them. So they're going to bring that innovation to you, or they're going to tap into more of their R&D budgets against what you're trying to achieve as well. As Detlef mentioned, they're moving to the orchestrators of the ecosystem. And I think this is really interesting if you think about the spend that's going externally. And then how do you bring in new business models? How do you bring that innovation in there? And we're talking about circular economy as well. How do you both manage the ecosystem, but also how do you create the new ecosystem for the future and drive that competitive advantage, whether it's against the growth or the sustainability side, by working with your partners? And this is not just the large partners. Again, I think if we look at a traditional SRM program, that would focus on the areas of big spend. This is about working with those innovative and emerging suppliers, the ones where your business is moving to. So how do you work with those small organizations, be the innovator of choice, but and bring that technology through as well? This big impact of doing this, McKinsey did some research with 100 companies over a 6-year period, and they showed companies with deep supplier collaboration achieving 2x EBIT growth over their peers. So there's a lot of opportunity in there as well. Quickly, some of the areas that they're seeing this. So in the revenue growth part of that model, they're showing that companies with deep supplier collaboration were able to commercialize externally sourced innovation by 40%, so increase the speed. So if you think about that, of capturing a new idea from a big supplier or a small one, but then bringing it across your organization, diffusing it across the business, running a POC and scaling it, if you can do that 40% quicker, and you look at where the speed that you need in your organization, the commercialization, both at a global level and regional side, this is huge impacts for businesses, and they try and achieve that. They're also seeing a 15 to 25% improvement in performance. So if you think about how important those suppliers are to you, if you can align your strategies better with them, put those important performance metrics and work collaboratively from those strategic QBR meetings and everything in between, increasing the performance, having the best teams working for you, delivering the most outstanding services to your customers, and the most exceptional products, that's a huge impact as well. So really thinking outside of your organization in terms of driving the efficiency and performance side. And then a huge topic here is ESG for all organizations. So the environmental, social, and governance side, we're seeing this in multiple areas. There's big movements in the US market around supplier diversity, which is coming to Europe, and I'm sure will be coming across Asia Pac as well as a region. We are also seeing Scope 3 and greenhouse gases as a major focus point across the world, as companies are looking at hitting the net zero. And hopefully, if you get to read Paul Polman's, the former CEO of Unilever's book, talk about net positive. So how companies go beyond just not damaging the world anymore, but actually get to a point where they're in a positive side as well. But again, 80% of greenhouse gases normally come from outside of your own organization. So working with those big suppliers, those big emitters within your organization is really key, but also innovating with them with the new products that are coming through. So it's both the innovation side as well as the reducing, because it is about that sustainable business growth. So it's a really exciting area where companies challenge to actually deliver on the supplier collaboration. And Detlef kind of mentioned it, is the cross-functional side. So you're working with the different stakeholders at an executive level, but also the team. So you have to align them, but also you have to align those relationships with your suppliers, and then all those projects, those programs that you're working with them. And that's where we help companies in terms of the technology we have as well. So, like, huge topic, I could speak for hours on it, but I'll keep it short and get into the conversation with you all. If anyone does want to speak to me, here are my details, and I'm sure we'll share them there, as well as Visible and the Procurement with Purpose side. Also do quite a lot of investment in the space. So really interested to speak to any Australian tech companies that look in procurement, supply chain, and sustainability. Love to speak to them as well.
I'm looking forward to asking both Detlef and Mark for some practical case studies that demonstrate the importance of a lot of what they've mentioned. So I've given them some forewarning there. In the meantime, so thank you very much, Mark. Again, more food for thought. A lot of what you mentioned, our next speaker has lived. He was responsible for delivering it. So for more than 20 years, entrepreneur Warwick Kramer has been turning his mind to the business of digital transformation and the evolution of what is next for society. He's driven by a passion for technology, global collaboration, and the exchange of ideas. Warwick has paved the way for many startups and new technologies, and this is a particular passion of his. As the Global Director Innovation Strategy for Kyndryl, the managed infrastructure services business that was spun off from IBM, Warwick collaborates with global partners, and he builds connections with the innovation ecosystem to support Kyndryl's customers to achieve their ambitions. Warwick is an adjunct professor in the Business School of the University of Queensland. He returned to Melbourne from Luxembourg in 2020, where he was CEO of the Vodafone Global Centre for Innovation in Europe, known as Tomorrow Street. This was a joint venture between Vodafone and the government of Luxembourg, and it was designed to scale late-stage startups and help them reach key global markets and make real change. Prior to moving to Europe, Warwick was an established entrepreneur in Melbourne, and among the businesses he founded was MicroP, a mobile payment company which developed a highly successful payment security authentication system that is still used by several banks today. Warwick holds a master's from Monash University. Welcome, Warwick.
Thank you, Marianna. It's just wonderful to be here in my home country to be able to speak today and be part of this event. So, look, my role, and I'm not going to present any slides today because I really want to leave enough time for the discussion on this really important topic. But my role really in Kyndryl, and just to give, for those of you that don't know Kyndryl as an organization, we were spun out by IBM in November last year. And we moved, it's an organization which has around 90,000 people. And essentially we look after the world's infrastructure. And so essentially we keep the lights on for everything that we take for granted, from banking to airports, etc. I've been really fortunate to join the organization at the beginning stages. And my role is really thinking around how we can work with smaller organizations, bring them into our footprint, add value to our customers, but more importantly, help those startups to grow across a global network and help them to become successful. So that's really what I've been working on. It's been really wonderful to be back in Australia and just seeing how much has actually changed over the years that I've been away, and how our startups and that whole ecosystem has grown. And it's been a really wonderful thing to see so many startups becoming, thinking internationally, and there's the hubs that didn't exist before when I left. So thank you. And Maria, I'll hand over to you because I'm really keen to start the conversation with Detlef and Mark.
Okay, so that's fantastic. Thank you. Let's begin with a question to you, Warwick. You've just mentioned that you've returned to Australia and you've experienced the same challenges as every other expat that has returned. I'm interested to delve a little bit deeper into what you've found.
So Maria, it's a really good question. I found a lot, but it really seems just, we got stuck. As a country, we got stuck, we got comfortable, we got complacent. I entered a place where the pace of change and transformation was going really, really slow. And when I looked into it further, what I found and what I saw was that there was nothing really substantially being done. We were playing on the fringes with startups. There was a lot of, centers being created, and we've had some great startups, by the way, come out of Australia, definitely, but we could have had a lot more. And so that's what I really saw. Now, I really delved a little bit deeper because I wanted to understand why. What was really going on here? And when I started to look into it, I realized there was a complexity index that was put together by the Harvard University. And in 1995, Australia basically ranked 55. So for those of you that don't know about the complexity index, it's basically you take, minerals or resources and you add value to it, which then creates jobs for society and helps the economic growth of the country. In 2008, that study was actually done again and we were benchmarked and we'd slipped down to 87. Now, just to give you some context of that, we were hovering around countries that were just developing, right? Which was appalling for us. It meant that we would really become a country where we were just digging and shipping resources and adding no value. Now, in comparison, Germany, for example, sits number 1 in that index. And so basically everything that Germany touches, they create value. They add value to it. The other thing that I also learned, Maria, when I came back was, as I was sort of doing my research, was that we only added 3 new products into the Australian economy between 2004 and 2018. Now, a product was really considered that if it was absent 15 years ago and it was present today in our economy. Now, these 3 products were active carbon, hydrochloric acid, and lead foil. And these 3 products contributed a measly $2 per capita in 2019 to our economy. Now, if we look across the pond to Singapore, they added in the same period of time 17 new products in that same period, which contributed to a massive $1,746 per capita in comparison. And I was sort of seeing also when I came back, Maria, you asked a question, was that I was seeing states compete against each other rather than working together collaboratively and then going out to the world and working and, competing against the world externally. Now, this is, for me, from what I've seen, this is our greatest opportunity because now we understand what's going on. And we've got the opportunity to move forward and we've got the opportunity to move at pace and to make the relevant changes to really pave the way for some of the companies and some of the young companies that are really going to transform our economy.
I want to talk to you about that a little more later, but in the meantime, I want to go to Detlef. And Detlef, you worked in an organization that had people scattered across the world. You had to bring some order, you had to bring some discipline, you had to bring some focus. We're only a country of 26 million people. So, relatively speaking, when you're looking at global organizations, the sort of experience that you had to reshape the thinking within Vodafone, particularly with procurement, is not dissimilar to the sort of discipline that Warwick's talking about. Instead of spreading the jam so thin, or the peanut butter if you're American, so thin that it's tasteless, what you want is rich, deep sandwiches that are tasty. So you want to narrow the focus. I'm interested to see what it is that you did throughout your career to change the mindset.
I think you're spot on when you say you have to narrow the focus. I see most of the mistakes being made is by having a goal and objective list of 25 plus and then try to measure those, which is, in my opinion, impossible. I think throughout my career, I always try to focus on maximum 3 top contribution we wanted to do. And I give you an example of thinking beyond, which I think is important. During my time in the Silicon Valley, in 2001, the financial crisis hit, and many of our suppliers, which were a lot of small suppliers, specialized machining suppliers, came into financial trouble. And the risk was that those are going belly up and we lose them as a supplier. So the question was, what do we do? And here, procurement took the initiative, which is certainly not in the playbook of normal procurement. We matched, for instance, our finance department with the financial departments of the suppliers. We sent finance managers into the supplier. We started mergers and acquisition discussions with larger suppliers. We had a list of profiles of small vendors which were willing to be sold to larger vendors to survive. And why do I say this? Because the number one focus was keep supply coming. And in order to do so, we had to think out of the box. And that is what we did in that case. And so again, focus, take maximum 3 KPIs you want to work on. And clearly, in my opinion, always have a vision. If you don't have a vision, if you don't apply exponential thinking. I call it 10x procurement. Think the impossible. Where do you put the stake in the ground? You need people to orient themselves on something which is way out there. And that's why I'm a big friend of developing visions.
Thank you. Mark, an excellent way to rally effort and to narrow focus is to give people purpose, particularly in the environment in which we're living at the moment. The world has so many problems that it needs solved, and it needs them solved quickly. So what have you seen in your path? You mentioned Paul Polman's book. What have you seen amongst the customers that you advise that has worked to get people rallying behind a cause?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think most companies now are really focused on purpose, and you see that on their websites. But I think in the past it was about their products and services. Now purpose really pops out, whether it's the sustainability goals or the social impact they're having come through. But communication is key, and back to some of those numbers I mentioned about earlier, 80% of your greenhouse gases with your supply chain. What we're seeing is the way that communicate with their suppliers and I guess their value chain as a whole has really changed, especially through COVID. There's huge impact in terms of disruption there. So it's about that authenticity of brand coming through as they speak to their suppliers, but I think also to their customers and the employees, the important stakeholders. So we're seeing interesting, virtual supply days. We're doing this over the wire today, but how can you reach out to those important ones, not just the top 100 suppliers, but the thousands of suppliers you have, and really connect with them around the purpose of your organization, get them excited about what you're doing, and come on the journey with you. So we're lucky to work with large FMCG companies, like the likes of Unilever. They do an amazing job in terms of communication with their suppliers and getting them excited. And the other part of that is the revenue. We talk about sustainable business growth. If the suppliers don't come on the journey with the buying companies, then they're going to lose their traditional spend that's coming to them and not be part of the future. And that's where the new revenues, the new innovation, the new profitable revenue will come through as well. So we're seeing companies being look at that communication lines with their suppliers is a really important one, and not just with the big suppliers, with the innovative and new ones, because also they're looking at the regional side. They need to innovate in the regional side. They're looking at more local supply. So I think COVID has really changed the world in terms of supply chain, but also the way communication comes through and collaboration comes through as well. So we're seeing that, especially with resilience. We really need to do that. And today, as we speak, there's huge problems in Europe again with the invasion of Ukraine, and that is going to cause major supply chain disruptions for a long time ahead as well.
I'm glad you mentioned Ukraine. I wanted to make reference to recognise the lives that have been lost and the lives that have been upended. It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. Taking up that theme though, Warwick, a lot of that's based on trust, and a lot of it is based on getting in early. So if you want to innovate, you need to be developing, you need to be all over the ecosystem. You need to know who's working under the radar, and you need to also have the trust established that startups want to work with you, because many of them have been burned by approaching large organizations. But your experience is different, because we were talking about your relationship in Luxembourg, particularly with the PPP that you built. I'm interested to see how you built that ecosystem, because we have elements of it here in Australia, but I don't think we've cracked the nut yet.
Maria, it was it's a really interesting one, because the Triple P, I learned so much by that experience working with the Luxembourg government. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It was all about trust. Right? We couldn't do it alone, right? We did not have all the resources. We didn't have all the capability. And especially when you're dealing with startups, there's, corporates, they're difficult to work with. But on the flip side as well, startups can be equally just as hard, right? And so it was, how do we actually try to make it easier for both parties to come with building a program or a system that could be win-win for all? And I was really fortunate to work with the Luxembourg government and form the Triple P. And it was a true partnership because, we needed help when we were working with startups to bring them into the country. We needed help to set them up, etc. And, working with a country where the power really was how we actually did it together. We were bringing how we brought all the parties together for the common good. So that was government, enterprise, and startups. I also learned that when I was in Luxembourg, the reason why it was why we were able to achieve the Triple P was that they were willing to listen. The Triple P wasn't just set up where you wanted to shift your resources or your investments and get someone else to manage it. It was actually a true partnership in that respect. And so they were quite, willing to listen. They were extremely humble because they knew what they didn't know. And they were willing to take risks, which, took a lot of courage. And an example of that was, if I look at the space area, they decided as a country that they wanted to go into space. They wanted to attract the talent. They wanted to attract the investment. So they formed some of the legislation around minerals. They set up the space innovation centers, and then they backed themselves all the way. They partnered with people to make it happen. And, they worked together to unlock the value that the space brought. And it brought in just the thought leadership and all these different sort of positives that came out of it. I also saw in my time there with working with the government and within Luxembourg is how they actually embraced expats, Maria, which was really fascinating for me coming into a foreign country where I really didn't speak the language or really have a good understanding or grasp of the culture. They, in fact, have 48% of their population is actually expats. So you quickly gain very much a 360-degree perspective. And you learn so much. And it comes down to what Mark said around, unlocking that value, and what Detlef's been talking around. How do you actually unlock that value and work with different suppliers? Because when I'm working with a startup that's, lived in Eastern Europe, for example, and that's gone through economic hardships, here in Australia, we haven't had to go through that really. In comparison. And so that lived experience was very, very enriching for me to be able to relate to them and understand and learn that perspective.
It's fascinating when you look at, Luxembourg came onto my radar when I was preparing a speech for a fellow I used to work with who's since passed away, that he was delivering in Russia, of all places. And we were doing research, and as I'm looking at the program, there are all these people talking about space out of Luxembourg. And this was back in 2015, 2016. I'm like, what the hell's going on here, And the more you dig, and then suddenly you realize that here is this country of 680-something thousand people that happens to be per capita the wealthiest country in the world because they managed to have got it all right. And what was interesting, I remember we had our conversation with Pierre Gramigna early last year. It was the humility, it was the sense of, I don't have all the answers and I'm here to go on the journey with you. It quite mind-blowing. The other element, of course, Detlef, is the data. So procurement sits on this treasure trove of data, making sense of it beyond the PAP, beyond the basic Excel spreadsheet is the real prize, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. Again, spot on, Maria. I think procurement is in a unique position because being at the crossroads of external and internal information coming your way, if you then apply smart data analytics and you use artificial intelligence to create business intelligence by foreseeing certain developments, then I think you're on the right track. And it starts with data analytics in little areas. I give you one example, if that's okay for you. Procurement prides itself to have an impact on working capital and expanding payment terms, for instance. Now, however, sometimes that doesn't have an impact on working capital and you wonder why. If you then run the data of what's in the contract and what does accounts payable really apply, you sometimes have a gap because we pay too early. And just by having that knowledge, then you can go to AP and say, listen, you guys pay too early. We have an opportunity here, which then manifests in real money. That is just a simple example of taking advantage of data. Another example is if you are able to foresee the future to a certain degree. If you, for instance, compare the development roadmaps of two companies and you see that they are leaving the area of competition and focus on various other areas, there might be a likelihood that one company takes over the other. If you know this early enough, you are then adapting your roadmap of your company accordingly. And that is what I meant with business insight and business foresight. It is doable, but there is so much data that you need help, like for instance, through Akiro Labs, helping you sorting through this data and making sense of it.
Having made sense of it, Mark, you have to make choices. We talked about focus before. How do you help companies make the right choices?
It's an interesting one. I think you can't just boil the ocean in terms of where they put their plan and strategy. So it is focused. I think we're seeing that in terms of link it into the business strategy all the way up to the board. And I think that's somewhat was disconnected in some procurement organizations in the past where it was more savings orientated, which is great for profitability, but what's the cost of the savings? You might be kneecapping innovation or taking things down, especially when you look at the purpose side in terms of ESG and so forth. Scope 3 is definitely the focus at the moment, where we're seeing that across the world, and that's great because it is the decade of action. We need to start doing something about reducing carbon and greenhouse emissions this decade if we're going to give our kids any chance. So I think that's number one priority, and that's where companies are really reaching out to their suppliers to work on there. After that, we're seeing the supply diversity is a big trend as well. So I think we'll see that coming through on the ESG side, as well as water and forestry side as well. It's great that we're going to stop ripping down the Amazon and the forest in 2030 if there's any left. But yeah, we're seeing it through. But definitely, we're seeing Scope 3 and supply diversity and inclusion as key ones as well. But I think it's the other part they're really looking at is the economic impact of their buying. So the local communities. And what I think is exciting for Australia is how do the large companies and smaller ones actually look at innovating together in the ecosystem and actually driving the Australian economy by working together rather than having to go abroad. So I think that's where we're seeing companies now looking at how do they have the localized impact of where they buy as well.
So this is a question for the three of you. We had a car manufacturing industry for many years. It was heavily subsidized, but we had it. And as a result of that, we had many small manufacturers that contributed to that supply chain. Some of them have retired, others have moved into other sectors. To my mind, when you've got the chairman of the two largest EV companies in the world as Australians, it stands to reason that you do everything you could to attract some of that business to Australia and leverage the assets that you already have. Warwick, how should we be thinking about attracting that sort of investment to Australia, those global R&D hubs that come here that not only manufacture but also do their product development here?
So, Maria, it's a really interesting question. I think, what we've seen today is really Detlef showing us how to unlock the value in the balance sheet. Mark showing us how to act on purpose. I think the thing is but we have to make it easy for startups to work here, right? We have to make it easy to take the research and bring it to life and show how we can commercialize that research, right? We have to, think around the manufacturing capability. How do we bring the skills back in? How do we make Australia attractive and competitive again as a nation to the industry, that EV industry that you mentioned, Maria. The thing is, if we don't sort of give the startups the ability to latch on to big corporates and help them to grow, right, and bring them into the procurement circles and give them the problems to solve and give them the guardrails and the support that they need, we're not going to get there. We're not going to get the EV manufacturers like you described into the country. We're not going to unlock that value. So I think it's a great opportunity for us is now, and we really need to come together and really, I think, be united and go out collectively. As I said earlier, we can't solve this problem on our own, and so the government has to contribute to these. Enterprise and corporates have to contribute to this, and so do the startups. And we have to really nurture the next generation.
So, Detlef, here's picking up on that. In addition to attracting, we have organisations transforming themselves quite radically. We have public sector organisations, particularly in New South Wales, that are doing a digital transformation that is comparable to the best in the world. Service New South Wales has under the leadership of Victor Dominello, just done some remarkable things that have helped us during COVID. We also have major financial institutions through decisions taken in the past that are faced with having to rip out $8 billion in costs. Now, the simplest way is, of course, to slash and burn. But I also, from this conversation, see it as a tremendous opportunity to make informed decisions, to reshape the size of the bank, of the financial institution, with a startup's mindset. How do we reshape this business so that it does build back better? What are the sorts of things, Mark and Detlef, should they be thinking about? And Warwick, please pipe in at any time.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, the financial services sector, and London is a hub of it as well as but I think the fintech side in the UK, so a little bit building on Warwick's part, UK's been really good at getting funding for early stage companies. So we have the EIS tax and SEIS, which is great to get early stage in, but then there's the collaboration with the big banks as well. So I've worked with Barclays, doing some work with Lloyds at the moment as well. Really interesting of how they invest in a company. But if you think of the bank of the future, the fintech side is going to come through. But how do you take that to the customers, the consumers at mass, and also how do you bring it to the corporate customers as well? So I think we're seeing the ecosystem in the UK coming through. Yes, there is a productivity drive in there, but also, you have to have the security. This is financial data and so forth. So we're seeing the financial space making sure they get sandboxes for these companies to work around the consumer data, and then they can become in part of what the large banks are offering, because it's very hard for a small company then to go and start doing that. And the open banking side in the UK has been massive in that change. But I think it's a bit of a funding. I think it's also the leadership really understanding the change coming through. But yeah, there is going to be some productivity side, but I think some of that will be natural attrition. But then it's what the new business models is as well.
A large bank in Europe is a customer of Kiro Labs, and when you talk to them, it's interesting how they approach the startup community, because this bank says the difference between us, the traditional banking sector, and the startup community is they have the ideas, we have the trust of our customers, which I think is a smart observation, because they take advantage of the large innovation pool out there of the many startup companies by collaborating with them and applying the face of the traditional bank, which has the consumer's trust, and therefore they have joint successes. And they are not competing with each other, but they are complementing each other. And I think that is one of the approaches you could apply in Australia as well.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That is absolutely a pearl.
He's spot on. I mean, it's all about the collaboration, right? It's building the trust. It's taking the courage. It's, de-risking it as best as you can, and understanding too and being comfortable that as you go through that, some of the startups will not be successful, right? But you can de-risk that, and you can actually help everyone to be successful through that process. You're right, Detlef. I mean, when, you see the banks, they've got the trust of their customers, but also it's moving and building those use cases for the startups as well, building the success. What many corporates do is that they get the startup, let's go and do a procurement agreement, right? Okay, let's make it a little bit simple, and then let's put them in a corner and then expect them to work, right? That doesn't happen, right? Because they don't know how to deal with the corporate to begin with, right? Because they're speaking a different language, right? They're measuring from their criteria for measuring around their KPIs is very different to a startup, and they're working at different paces. The startup has to keep the lights on, to pay the salaries, to keep everything going. And the corporate's, going, well, let's work in the next, 12 months or next quarter or 2 quarters, so there's the sense of urgency is not there. So it's really, how do you bring the two together and be sensible about how you're going to interact and then bring that to life and execute on it.
So there's an old school buddy of mine from Southport School, actually, Christian, who runs Lend Invest. So Lend Invest does bridging of mortgages, both commercial and residential, but they do it on a peer-to-peer basis. So the big banks can't do that themselves, but the likes of Barclays have teamed up with Lend Invest. So it's a huge market, and Christians, I think they're the largest funded fintech in the UK, run by an Aussie, a Queenslander. So it's good to see, but that's the type of partnerships. They also have a partnership with Market Invoice. I think it's called Market Finance now, and that's looking at accelerated payments, again with a peer-to-peer approach on that. So we're finding these partnerships coming through from fintech and large banks to do it. And I think this is what we'll see coming through, giving that access, that trust of the large bank in terms of Barclays, but then the new innovative model of a Lend Invest and Market Finance is a great opportunity coming through.
Detlef, I want you to have the last word.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a last remark on the collaboration between large and small companies. And there are opportunities and challenges. And let me start with the challenges because then I can end up with the positive, the opportunities. So on the challenge side, traditionally large companies apply the processes they are used to work with. And that means there is a 150-page contract. There is 15 discussions before you then say, send me a prototype, which of course has to be free of charge, etc., etc. I think those are the processes we have to say goodbye to, because startup companies cannot deal with 150 pages contracts. They don't even have a lawyer. Warwick talked about this, how to do this, how to create this trust component. And once we learn how to change our behavior towards the small companies, I think the trust gets established and they propose new ideas. As I said, this complementary, and this is happening in all industries, not just banking. So then on the opportunities, and that brings me back to your earlier data point, Maria, having access to a lot of data and having access to all the nodes out there in the ecosystem, creating the transparency of opportunities in the market should foster that collaboration between small and large companies, because large companies don't have the bandwidth to cover all the new ideas coming out there of the market. And at the end, never forget, everything is driven by the customer. The consumer wants these solutions, and hence they are looking out for it. And that is what we can take advantage of.
That's a perfect place to leave it. I've got one more point to make, Detlef. It's not just that the small company can't afford the 150-page document. The big companies that are doing business with you can't afford them either, because if you're spending that much on contracts, you're not spending it on your staff, your shareholders, or your customers. So it's a very important point. This has been a great conversation. We've been going for an hour. We can go for another hour easily. What it's demonstrated is the power of this lever that companies can pull, the power of strategic employment. What it's demonstrated is that you have to look right across the company at all the different opportunities that are available for you to serve your customer and your user. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for your time. I can understand and see now why you've enjoyed each other's company and been so successful in collaboration with one another. And I look forward to the day of welcoming you in person to Sydney and to Australia and to Adelaide, perhaps without quite so much rain. But until then, my thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.